Hi, I am Jenny Rushmore of Cashmerette, and this is the Eustis top sew along, which is one of the patterns from my book, Sewing the Curve, which is all about learning to sew beautiful clothes that fit you incredibly well if you are curvy. So even if you've never sewn a t-shirt before, today I'm going to take you through every step from beginning to end so that together with the instructions in the book, you will be able to confidently make a t-shirt that actually fits. In this video, I'm going to take you through how to sew knits, how to do gathering, how to insert a sleeve in the flat method, how to insert a t-shirt neckband. The technique would be the same if you were doing a t-shirt armband, and how to hem knits. So let's take a look at the samples. So this sample is view A of the Eustis, and this is the one you have seen modeled in the book. So this has a sort of high hip length over here. It has this really nice, it's sort of like somewhere between a scoop and a boat neck with a neckband. So this is the neckband here that I'm going to show you how to insert. And then it has these fun sleeves, which elevate it a little bit from being a simple t-shirt. So there are gathers up here at the top of the sleeve head, then a slightly full sleeve, and it ends with the elastic here. So it's a little elasticated wristband, and it gives you this nice, slightly balloon-shaped sleeve. So it's a really great way to have something that's a little bit elevated. But alternatively, you can sew it with regular t-shirt sleeves. So here is another sample from the book, and this one simply has regular, so no gathering at the top, short sleeves. We also have a long sleeve length for you to cut. Now, between you and me, you can cut those at any length you want. So whatever sleeve length is your preference, you can just go for it. So those are the two views, and I'll be showing you how to do both in this online class. So the first thing you want to do is measure yourself and figure out what size you're going to make. So for measuring yourself, I recommend checking out the book because there's lots of information there. And you can also find out more and see more photos on our website at cashmerette.com/sizing. And there is also one of our sort of biggest insider secret tricks at Cashmerette, which is instead of having to look at all these tables to figure out what size to make, which can be a little bit tricky when you're initially a beginner, we actually have a sizing calculator. So on the sizing calculator, all you do is insert the measurements that we told you how to take in Sewing the Curve. You also add your bra size, and don't worry about super precisely. As long as you tell us your rough bra size, that's fine. And it will tell you exactly what size or sizes to make. So it might tell you, make a 24 CD. Great, you know what size to make. Or it might tell you, make a 24 CD with a 30 waist and a 24 hip. If you need to do that, then you need to do what's called grading between sizes. That's covered in your book, but you can also learn more at cashmerette.com/grading, where we take you through that in even more detail that I couldn't go into in the book. Finally, it might tell you, the sizing calculator, that you need a full bust adjustment or a small bust adjustment. Now, the first thing I would say is, if it's recommending a small bust adjustment on this t-shirt, you kind of don't really need to. Because of how t-shirts fit you, you can get away without doing it. So if it tells you small bust adjustment, just ignore that. If it tells you full bust adjustment, anything up to 1 or 2 inches, again, you're probably going to be okay without it. And the reason for that is that t-shirts stretch. So there's a really good chance that you don't even need to do that. If it's suggesting more than that, then you should probably do a full bust adjustment. You can learn more about how to do a knit full bust adjustment, which is different than a woven one, at cashmerette.com/FBA. So now let's take a look at the pattern pieces. So there are 2 ways, or 3 ways, I guess, really, of getting your pattern pieces. The first one is to use the printed pattern pieces that are in the box at the back of the book. Now, bear in mind when you do them, some of the pieces are slightly overlapped, so you really need to trace the pieces. You can't just cut them out. And in some cases, the pieces might have been divided and be across 2 pieces of paper. So check that out before you put them together. So if you do that, you end up with some traced pieces. Alternatively, you can download the PDFs. You can learn how to do that in the back inside cover of the book. And then there are instructions in the book for how to assemble one at home or how to send the file to be printed at a copy shop using the A0 version. Now, what you're seeing here is what you would get if you send off a copy for an A0 version. So it would look something like this because it hasn't been taped together, it's just been printed on a big piece. Another thing to bear in mind if you're using the PDF pattern is that layers are your friend. So layers allow you to only print the size you need. So in this case, I've made the 16GH, and can you see how clean and simple this is? On a normal sewing pattern, there are lots and lots of lines, and it can be a little bit confusing trying to find the right line for you, especially in areas like arm side curves. But if you print them just using layers and a PDF, you actually get this much cleaner version, which can be a little bit easier when you're a beginner. So I recommend that if you're using a PDF. So the Eustis top has 5 pattern pieces, but you'll only be using 4 because there are 2 options for sleeves. So you'll be using one or the other sleeve. This is piece number 1. So this is the front of the pattern. And if you think about it, it basically goes like this on the body. That's where it's going to be. A distinctive thing about Cashmerette patterns is we often have very curvy side seams. Why? Because we're designed for curves. And if you've got big boobs, this kind of what's called a boob bubble helps you get a nice fit in t-shirts. Just something to be aware of is that if you get a t-shirt pattern that has an extremely straight side seam, it may not fit you so well. This piece is cut on the fold, and these arrows indicate cut on the fold. So if you're using folded fabric, you would place this on the fold and cut, and you'll then get a mirror image. Or if you're cutting on the flat, which is generally what we recommend, you would trace around it, flip it over, and trace the other side. And in that case, this fold line, you just need to be on the grain of the fabric. There's also a lengthen, shorten line here, which if you do want to lengthen or shorten your pattern, you can do it there. And you'll find out how to do that in the basic pattern adjustments section. So that's the front. There are 3 different fronts, A, B, and C for CD cup, EF cup, and GH cup. Only the front piece is affected by the cup size. So if later you want to make a t-shirt in another cup size, you only have to reprint the front. So that's piece 1. In this case, 1C, because I got big boobs and I'm in GH. Then we have the back piece. So looks kind of similar. I'm just going to show you it fully there. So again, it's cut on the fold at the back here. You also want to note the notches and make little snips, but really little, at the edges of your fabric so that you have them to align when you're pulling everything together. And then again, there's a lengthen, shorten line. The third piece is the neckband. So just a long piece, fairly straightforward. And one thing to think about when you're doing the neckband is exactly where the placement, if you're using like a stripe or you're using a print, where would you like it to be on the neckband? And you want to be precise if you're using a stripe, because you don't, if you were ever so slightly off grain, you could end up with the stripe kind of going diagonally across it. You don't want that. You want to make sure it's nicely lined up. And then we have the sleeves. So this is piece number 4. So this is the puffed sleeve. So this is the one that has the gathering at the top. So you want to cut 2 of these, and this is not on the fold, so it has a grain line down the middle. And again, in the book, I show you how to use a ruler to line up the grain line with the edge of the fabric. And then finally, if you want to do a regular sleeve, so it doesn't have a puff, this is piece number 5. We have a line here for where you can make short sleeves, and at the bottom is for long sleeves, but you can draw a line anywhere here that you want. This is the magic of sewing. You can draw a line anywhere beneath about this point and make whatever length sleeves you like. So those are our pattern pieces. Let's move on to our fabric and our notions. So to make your Eustis top, you need to use a light to mid-weight knit fabric with at least 20% stretch. So what that means is if you take 10 inches or 10 centimeters and you stretch it, it will go to 12 centimeters. You can, or 12 inches, you can use a higher stretch fabric, that is fine. And in the case of the Eustis top, it only needs to stretch in the one direction. So some fabrics stretch in one, some fabrics stretch lengthwise as well. You only need it to stretch in one direction. If it stretches in two, that's okay, but at least one. You cannot make the Eustis with woven fabrics. It simply won't work. It won't fit on your body. If you want to make a similar top in a woven, you need a different pattern. Now, I want to show you some examples of the types of fabric you can use. So this here is a beautiful bamboo jersey from our friends at Core Fabrics. And this is actually the jersey that is used in Ty's Eustis that she's wearing with the like really tropical print Randolph skirt in the book, one of my favorite outfits. So you can see it's easily got 20% stretch. It actually probably has more than that. I'm going to guess like at least 30%. And it's really nice. I will say I would avoid anything shiny as a beginner because it tends to be a little bit difficult to work with and it kind of shows up issues more easily. But this kind of matte t-shirt jersey is beautiful. Core Fabrics has a really wide variety of it most of the time. So a great one to check out. You can also go for prints. So here is a really nice, more like mid-weight knit. So it's halfway between a jersey and a ponte. And you can see, again, it's a stretch. Now, this is something to bear in mind though. The Eustis will stretch a little bit across your bust. So you do want to make sure if you use a print, what happens when you stretch it? Now, this one is actually not a great option because, let me show you, the circles distort. So if it's a little bit stretched across your bust, you're actually going to be able to see very easily that the circles are distorting. So that's a good tip of something to think about when you're deciding to use a print. Here is another lovely print. Again, lots and lots of stretch. This is, I believe, a rayon jersey. And two other things you want to think about apart from the distortion. The one is it needs to have good recovery. And what that means is after it's stretched, does it ping back? So you can see this one pings back perfectly. It goes straight back to how it was. But there are some jerseys that after you do this will just stay stretched out. You do not want to use them for this. Your top will end up looking bad. I will say this is something where fabrics that have a little bit of lycra in them makes a really big difference. So 100% cotton jersey sometimes stretches out and doesn't ping back. So you need to check that. If you're buying your jersey online, it's a really good idea to get a sample first, or swatch they call it sometimes, sent to you. And then you can have a real play with it and see what happens. The other thing you want to make sure is when it's a little bit stretched, that it doesn't go see-through and that you don't have what's called grin-through. So if a print is printed on white background, a white substrate, sometimes when you stretch it, you suddenly see the white through, and that's particularly common in very dark jerseys. So again, that's another thing to check. When it stretches a little bit, are you seeing through? Now on this one, no, there is no grin through, so that's great. Slightly heavier jerseys are easier as a beginner. I definitely wouldn't use anything that's called tissue weight or very lightweight, just because they're really difficult to sew with. And some fabrics have a bit of a tendency to curl at the edges. So if you are buying in a store, have a look at the edge of the fabric and seeing if it's really curling. If it is, less of a good option as a beginner. You can use it, it's just a little bit harder to play with. But I would say that the ever so slightly heavier jerseys, more in the mid-weight knits, are a little bit easier as a beginner. So that's your fabric. Now, for the other things that you're going to need, you need a needle in your machine, and you should use a ballpoint or a stretch needle. The reason is that those needles are a little bit blunted at the end, and what they do is they slide between the fibers of the knit fabric rather than piercing them. If you pierce them, you are more likely to get little snags. And it's an interesting one. In woven fabric, that doesn't happen. In knits, it can. So you want to use a ballpoint or a stretch needle. You need some thread, just regular all-purpose polyester thread. There are a few other things that are helpful. So the first thing is this, which is called Wonder Tape. And I think in the book I call it double-sided dissolvable hemming tape because that's not a brand name. And basically what it is it's double-sided sticky tape, okay? So what you do is it's got paper on one side and it's sticky on the other. So if you were to use it, you were to take a piece, you stick it on your fabric, I'm just gonna stick it on the table, And then you peel off the paper. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. And the tape is left there. Now, what's amazing about this tape is that your machine can sew through it no problem. And then when it gets wet, it dissolves and disappears. And it's a really, really nice way to secure fabric before you're sewing over it, especially for hems. So I actually use it all the time, especially for knits, because it's a little bit easier than pins. If you're making view A with the elastic in the wrists, you are also going to need elastic. So we recommend 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch elastic. So this is 1/4 inch elastic here. And you need either a safety pin or a bodkin to take the elastic through. So this is a bodkin, and basically how it works is it's got this open end and a little sliding circle. So you take the elastic, the end of the elastic, you put the bodkin on it, so you kind of grip it, it's like tweezers, and then you slide the circular bit along, the ring, and then it secures it. So now it's secured. And what you then do is you use this to go through the channel to put the elastic in. And it's a little bit easier than using a safety pin. Now, you don't have to buy a bodkin, especially if you're a beginner, but it's an option of something to do. So we're nearly ready to start sewing, but a few tips in the meantime. So in terms of the stitch length, apart from when I say otherwise, you want to set your machine to a zigzag stitch, which is 2.5 long by 0.5 wide. Now, this probably doesn't look like what you think of in your head as a zigzag because it's actually only a very minor zigzag. The great thing about this is it allows your fabric to stretch without the thread popping, because if you do a straight stitch, it will just pop out. But it's almost straight. And because it's almost straight, your seams will look really nice on the outside. If you use a zigzag like this, you get sort of slight rippling on the outside of the seam. So 2.5 by 0.5 is what we recommend for general construction on knits. In terms of finishing your seam allowances, refer to the section in the book that gives you the options. What I will say is you don't have to. So if you want to practice making a t-shirt and you don't have much time, you don't actually have to finish seam allowances on the vast majority of knits. The reason why is they don't fray. So it won't look as professional on the inside and it might not last as long, but if you're just learning and you're just getting used to it, then I would recommend, potentially just skipping the seam allowances, finishing them. The alternative, you can use pinking shears on them, you can do another zigzag on them, or you can use a serger, also known as an overlocker. Today, I'm going to use a serger, so you will see where the edges have been finished, but it's really up to you. So with that, you picked your size, you made your pattern pieces, you've cut them out, chose your fabric, cut it out, got your notions together, we are ready to sew. Okay, so the very first step of making the Eustis top is to sew the shoulder seams. So here is piece 1, this is the front, and it's right side up. So you can see right side's got stripes, wrong side, you can see the white on the back there. So here's piece 1, and then I'm going to get the back piece, piece 2, which is this piece, and I'm going to place them right sides together. So the right side is the stripes, and I'm going to place them right sides together. And then I'm going to pin them at the shoulders. So the shoulders here are not super wide, so 2 pins is probably sufficient. Pin one side, and now I'm going to pin the other side. Okay, now it's over to the sewing machine. So over to the sewing machine, I've got my shoulder here. I'm going to line up the edge of the fabric with the 1/2 inch seam allowance mark on my machine. And I've set it to a narrow zigzag. I'm going to take out this pin because you do not want to sew over pins. Take a couple of stitches forward, press the reverse button, a couple of stitches back, and then just sew this seam. Back stitch at the end again, and there we are. Pull the threads off. There is your sewn shoulder seam. Now I'm just going to do the second shoulder seam and finish both seam allowances. Okay, so here are the sewn shoulders, And I also used a serger just to finish the seam allowances, which I'm going to be doing throughout this construction. One thing just to note, I'm using black thread so that you can see it, but you want to use a thread color that matches your fabric to minimize the chance you can see it on the outside. So those are our shoulders. We have now connected the front and the back. Next up is the neckband. Here is my neckband. The first thing that I'm going to do is fold it in half along the length. I never know whether to call that lengthwise, widthwise, who knows, anyway. And then pin the ends together. Again, it's a short seam, 2 pins is fine. Now I'm going to sew across this end. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, so now the end of the neckband is sewn. So I'm going to press flat, which is the first thing you want to do anytime you're pressing. And then I'm going to open it up. I'm going to spread the seam allowances apart with my fingers, and then I'm going to press them open. Okay, now that's done, what we need to do is fold the whole thing wrong sides together. So what that means is pulling it in half like this all the way around. So it's going to end up looking like this. What I find easiest is to press it section by section. So I'm going to line up the notches here and the seam here and just press this flat. There we go. Then I'm going to move to the next section, the third section, and the final section. Okay, and now I'm just going to do a final press and press the whole thing flat. You can use a little bit of steam if you have it. Okay, so I now have the neckband. Now there's an optional step now, which I will show you, which is to baste around the edge of the open edge here. And basically what that will do is just make it a little bit easier when we come to insert the neckband. So over to the sewing machine to do the basting. Okay, so I'm going to take the loop. It doesn't actually matter for basting what side it's on, so I'm just going to place it here. And the main thing is that you just want the sewing to be at less than 1/2 inch, so within the seam allowance. So I'm just going to align the piece of fabric with the edge of my presser foot because that is roughly 1/4 inch. And I should just sew all the way around. This time, no need to backstitch. I didn't use pins because I don't need to all the time, but you certainly could do pins to help you do it evenly. Okay, so now we have our neckband ready to insert. So something just to note about the neckband first. So we've got the seam that we sewed. This is going to be aligned with the center back. And then the notches that you made in the neckband, there is one that is the opposite side of the center back. So this is the center front. And then there are 2 notches that correspond with the shoulder seams. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pin it to the top. So you take the front and back and you spread them out and you place them on your surface right sides up. And I would say that this is probably the trickiest bit of making a t-shirt, but it's also not actually that hard. Now, if you didn't already, which looks like I didn't, you need to make a notch at the center front and center back of your neckline. It's easy to do that. You just need to fold it in half. So I'm just going to fold it in half here, line these up. Okay, so that's my center back. And line it up in the other direction. That's my center front. Okay, so I need those to help me with this pinning. So lay it back out again. There we go. So get your get your band. Now we want to match the raw edges of the neckband up with the raw edges of the neckline. So I'm going to start by getting where the seam is in the neckband and lining it up with that center back notch that I just made. And I'm going to place it there and I'm going to pin it. So then I'm going to pin the center front. Now, you want to make sure that this isn't twisted the wrong way. So you need to think about it that it's going consistently all the way around, okay? There we go, like that. So I find the center front notch on the neckband, the center front notch on my top, and pin. Now I'm going to find the shoulder notch on the neckband here, and I am going to, surprise, surprise, attach it to the shoulder. There we go. And now I'm going to do the other side. And you will have pressed the shoulder seams in the top backwards. So let me just check. So when you've done that, you want to make sure that your pin is also going through the seam allowance pressed backwards. Okay, now what you will see pretty quickly is that the neckband is actually slightly shorter than the neckline underneath. And that's intentional because basically it slightly pings into shape and that's how you get a t-shirt neckband look. But to make it a little bit easier to sew, you then want to add more pins halfway from the neckband and halfway along the neckline. So it's about there. You can estimate it a little bit. I'm going to pin here. So you're just segmenting this to make it a little easy to sew. So I'm going to go in the middle here. Again, and one thing you can do is you can stretch it a little bit. You're going to be doing this later to find the middle point. If you really want to get accurate, you could also measure it. But I eyeball it a little bit. Okay, so now we have pins at the top and bottom, shoulders, and in between each segment. If you want, you can add more pins here, but in a funny way, I think actually this amount makes it the easiest to sew. So now over to the sewing machine for a slightly different sewing technique. So because the band is slightly shorter than the neckline, and you can see that if I hold it up, can you see that this is the neckline and there's more fabric and there's less fabric here? What you're going to do is you're going to sew section by section, and as you do it, you are going to stretch the neckband just a little bit until it's flat with the neckline underneath. So the goal is not to stretch this part, it's to stretch this part until it matches. So as you are going through the machine, you are going to hold the neckband, just pull it a little bit, but only the neckband, not this piece. And you're going to do it section by section between the pins. So I like to start at the back because that's the least visible place. And the other thing I want to suggest, if you have this on your machine, and most machines have it, you can remove this section and it makes it easier. It's called a free arm. It makes it much easier to sew things that are round because you literally slip it round the machine like this. So if you have a free arm, I recommend using that. So I'm going to place this in and make sure that the edge of the fabric is at the 1/2 inch seam allowance mark. I'm going to hold the neckband and slightly pull as I go. So I'm going to start back stitching and slightly pull until I hit this, well, don't hit the pin, until I reach just before the pin, take that out. So now I have the next segment, and again, I need to slightly stretch the neckband. Next pin. And you can see why you want to evenly have divided them. And remember, you can go as slow as you want. You want to keep on making sure that it's lined up underneath. It's very easy for it to slip. Okay, so pull. As you can see, I'm only pulling a little bit. I'm not pulling super, super hard. As you do this, your basting may pop out, which you can see mine is doing, but that's okay. So again, make sure it isn't puckering underneath there, and pull. keep on segmenting all the way around. Just like that. Back stitch. And there you go. One good idea at this point is to look on the back and just make sure that you caught it all the way around and there aren't any major puckers. There's actually, look, see, even I'm not perfect. There is a little pucker here. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to seam rip just that section and actually redo it. So to do that, I am just going to unpick either side of this area. Zigzags are actually a little bit harder to undo, but this one isn't too bad. There we go. And on the back side, it's going to come out too. Okay. So now I'm going to re-sew this section, and what happened is I didn't pull the band enough, and that's why that happened. Okay, so I'm going to go back a little bit to overlap the stitching. Okay, and now I'm going to pull it a bit more than I had. Back stitch. And now let's see if that's better. Yes, that's much better. So I don't have the puckers in there. So if you make a mistake, that's what you do. Okay, so I have sewn the neckband on. So now we have a few more steps to finish it off. So the first thing I'm going to do is trim the seam allowance in half. So I'm going to open it up to the wrong side, and using a pair of scissors, I am going to trim this 1/2 inch seam allowance down to 1/4 inch. This is something you obviously want to be careful, because if you make a mistake doing this and you go through the stitching, it's a little hard to recover. So be careful as you're doing it. Make sure there's nothing else underneath, and just cut all the way around. Get that off and carry on here. Right back to the beginning. Okay, so we've gone all the way around that loop. So I have now trimmed around the seam allowance of the neckline and the shirt. The next thing to do is finish this seam allowance in whatever method that you're using. So now the edge of the seam allowance has been finished. We need to press the neckband to kind of finish that. So the first thing you're going to do is lay it out, wrong side up. Get it here. There we go. And what you'll see is that the neckband kind of wants to flip in the way that it's meant to. So basically the folded top of the neckband is going to go in towards the middle of the circle, and the finished edge is going to come out towards the inside of the garment. And because this is a rounded curved edge, I always recommend pressing on a tailor's ham. And if you don't have one, you can use a rolled up towel, but it helps you retain the curve. So I'm going to place one section under, just again, use my fingers to put it in the direction it needs to be. And then I am just going to use my iron to press it in the direction it needs to go. Now I will say that some jerseys are a little bit springy, so it'll kind of want to spring back, and that's okay. We're just trying to encourage it to go in the right direction. Around there, continue. And you just keep on moving it over the ham as needed. Now you're going to flip it over. I recommend that you use a press cloth. I'm not going to, just to make it clear for you to see. But the nice thing about a press cloth, which is basically just a piece of sheer fabric, is that it protects your fabric from the iron. If there are some knits especially that go shiny if they have slightly too much heat on them, so it protects it from that. Also, occasionally, I don't know if you have this issue, occasionally like I'll have an iron like explode and water will come out of it and like strange stains, and it will help avoid that. However, look at me going on the, being a rebel, taking on the risky side, and I'm just going to press it from the right side now. So make sure again that the seam allowance is pressing this way. So I'm constantly, as I'm going around, repositioning it. Now there is one extra thing you can do if you like. It's not in the instructions, but it's a bonus. You can do another zigzag just outside this seam around, and what it does is it secures the seam allowance down and totally stops it from moving or flipping. I do recommend it. It is a nice thing to do. The only thing I'd say is if you are making a solid color t-shirt, you really need to make that stitching very, very accurate, or it will kind of like jump out at you when you're wearing it and not look so professional. So especially as a beginner, if you're going to do that additional line of stitching, just go really, really carefully and really slowly, because it is something that can sometimes make t-shirts look a bit more handmade, as opposed to looking like you bought them in a shop. Okay, so there we go. The neckband is now installed. It's sitting in the proper direction and it's looking pretty snazzy, if I say so myself. So next we are going on to sleeves. Okay, so now let's get on to sleeves. So I'm actually going to put a view A sleeve in one side of my t-shirt and a view B in the other. You obviously would do both the same, unless I guess you wanted a very quirky look. But we're going to start off by showing you how to do the view A puffed sleeve. So this is the pattern piece. And one thing that's really important is you must mark the notches. So you either snip in at the edge or make a mark in another way. So you have notch at the top of the sleeve cap here, and that's going to connect to the shoulder seam of the shirt. These two notches are the gathering notches, so we're going to sew between them to create our gathering. These two notches indicate this is the back of the sleeve, and this one notch indicates the front of the sleeve. So here is the sleeve that I cut. So my top notches are here and here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew two lines of gathering stitches. Gathering stitches are straight stitches, long stitch length, and you want to sew both of them within the 1/2 inch seam allowance. You don't backstitch, and you want to leave long threads either side. And we're going to sew one across the top and then two across the top. So let's go and do that. So I'm going to do this on the wrong side to make it clear for you. So I'm starting at this gathering notch. I'm going past the top of the sleeve to this gathering notch. If it's ever so slightly more or less, that's fine. So I'm going to start with long threads here. And I'm going to start by doing the furthest one away from the edge. And I'm actually going to move my needle over as a way to do the two lines. So I've just moved my needle that way using my needle adjuster. If you don't have that, you could move the fabric. I have changed to a straight stitch, long stitch length. And I'm just going to sew around. Now, no back stitching, just going to lift the presser foot up and I'm going to pull this. I might have to do a little bit of a wobble on the hand wheel. Pull this and give myself threads on the other end. So now I have long thread, threads on both ends. Okay, so now I'm going to sew my second line and I'm going to sew it in the middle between this line and the edge of the fabric. Make sure you don't catch these threads as you're doing it. And I just moved my needle back to the middle and that will allow me to do that. Just get this out of the way. There we go. Get these ones out of the way. And again, I'm going to lift the presser foot, just pull this off the machine. Sometimes you need to wiggle the hand wheel a little bit. So that's what I was just doing. And there we have our two rows of gathering stitches. Okay, so I've done those two lines of gathering stitches. So the way that you bunch them up is by pulling on the bobbin thread, which is the underneath. So because I sewed it with this side up to show you, this side is the bobbin thread. And you literally just take it and cinch the fabric along the thread, if you see what I mean. So you're pulling the bobbin out, although I guess really what I'm doing is holding it, and then I'm just rippling the fabric along. And you want to do that evenly. So what I do is I just start by doing it a little bit. Do one, and then do the other, just to get yourself a little start. Now you actually need to look at doing it precisely. So we've roughly done a little bit of gathering, but we actually need to do it precisely. So to do that, so I'm identifying, this is the back of the sleeve because there's 2 notches here, and it's important that you get that the right way around. So I'm going to lay out my bodice, my attached front and back, out flat, like this. And I'm going to take my sleeve and I am going to lay it with the top notch here on the sleeve aligning with the shoulder sleeve. Now, I need to make sure I've done it the right way around, and I have not. So there's a double notch here, and on this arm side, there's only a single notch because it's the front. So this means I have done it the wrong way around. It's this side. So I'm going to find the center notch on the top of the sleeve, and I'm going to align it with the shoulder seam here, keeping the basting threads out of the way. And I'm just going to pin it there. Now I'm going to find the gathering notch. So that's right at the end of where I gathered. And then I'm going to find the equivalent gathering notch on the sleeve head here. Now, what you can immediately see, the distance from here to here is shorter from the distance from here to here on the sleeve. And that's where the gathering's coming in. We are now going to cinch this up, gather this up until the distance from this pin to this notch is the same distance from this pin to this notch. So you can do it in half. So we're just going to do this side and then we'll do the other side. So these are the front threads and these are the back threads. So I am just going to hold the back bobbin threads and just cinch the fabric along. And sometimes what it's easiest to do actually is push it as close as you can. So cinch it up as much as you can and then just ease it out. That's actually what I find easiest. So I crunched it all up. So now I'm going to place these 2 notches together and pin them. And now I'm just going to relax the gathering out until the 2 lengths match up. And you can play around with this. You want to try and get it as even as you can. So what you don't want is that it's like super bunched up in one area and then not at all in the other. So you want to try and get that even. And you can pull on the threads more, and then you can also spread it apart with your fingers. So I've now got that to be pretty even. So I'm going to add another couple of pins. And when you're adding the pins, you want to try and get the edges of the fabric aligned as much as possible. So it's a little bit hard now because the fabric is all bunched up on the top. But there we go, that's now done. Now I'm just going to repeat the same on the other side. So I'm going to begin, get the bobbin threads separated out there. I'm going to begin by scrunching it up as much as it will go. I'm going to pull it over and match these notches up here. And now I'm going to spread the gathers out so that they are even and the 2 pieces of fabric are matching each other in length. So actually on this side, I need to pull the bobbin threads even more because it needs to be a little bit shorter than I've made it. Okay. I'm checking if these 2 edges are equal. I'm going to distribute that a little bit. Now that looks good. Going to pin it. I will say in a printed fabric, you won't notice the evenness of the gathers as much as in a plain fabric. If you're doing a plain fabric, I would encourage you to play around with this until you've got to a point that it's really even. So we've now pinned that part. Now we want to pin the rest of the armscye. So let us first do the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bit of the sleeve and this bit of the arm side, and these are going together. So that's going to that. So the first thing, and the other thing is there's a notch here and there's a notch here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to match these up and I'm going to match the notches up. So I'm just going to pull them together. I'm going to pull the ends together first and pin them. Now I'm going to go along both and match the notches. Okay, so now we've got the very, very top and the very, very end pinned. And now I'm just going to pin the remaining edge together. So just put a few more pins on here. Okay, now I'm going to do the exact same on the back. So here is the back arm side. Here is the back of the sleeve. I'm going to lay it out like you see it in the instructions. So we're going to join this piece to this piece, this notch to this notch. Okay, so pulling them together. And this is where I explain this a little bit in the book, is that the instructions show you what things should look like, but they can't really exactly replicate like how 3D this is all looking. So they're kind of like a simplified idea to show you the concept of what you're trying to achieve. But hopefully this video sew along can help you kind of get your head around the difference between an illustration and what it might look like exactly in reality. So this is now pinned in. So you can see it's all buckled up a little bit. This is very normal. These long threads, okay, this is a bit of a tricky one. You don't want to totally lose them yet, because if you cut them very, very short, they may come out. But what you can do is certainly trim them back a little bit before you sew, because you don't want them getting in everything. So I'm still leaving a couple of inches, but I'm trimming them back a bit. Okay, so now I'm going to sew this in. So I'm going to sew starting at one end all the way around to the other end. Okay, so I'm going to bring this over to the sewing machine. Now, the main thing you want to make sure when you're doing this is that you don't have bunched up fabric on the other side. So you want to try and get it as flat as you can. So flat on the back, flat on the front. There's also a lot of pins, and you are really going to need to take them out as you sew, because you don't want to sew over pins. It's very dangerous. They can break and go in your eye, or they can go into your machine and break your machine. So it depends. Bad for eyes, bad for machines. As you can see, there is nothing wrong with starting and stopping when you are sewing. And if you have a machine with a speed dial, now is a good time to make it slow so that you can do it very accurately. So I'm getting into the gathers now. Okay, again, keep on adjusting it, keep on making sure the fabric underneath is flat. And the basting stitches should be inside the seam allowance, but even if they're not, you can easily remove them later. Hit a pin there, there we go. Okay, so now I have sewn in the sleeve. You can see the gathering here where it's all bunched up. And we have finished the seam allowances as well. So now I'm going to press. So I'm going to use my tailor's ham again underneath, because we're pressing curves. Now, because of the gathers, I'm actually going to press the seam allowance away from the sleeve towards the body, which is slightly different just because of these gathers here. And when you press here, you don't want to press in this area, you only want to press in the seam allowance. Now, normal sleeves, so the View B sleeves, you would actually press towards the sleeve. That is more of the standard. But here, we're going to press it away. And as you can see, I'm just very carefully pressing only the seam allowance. So I've done the top there. Now I will go down, and again, using the tailor's ham, just go section by section. So I'm just pulling it flat, so I'm pressing onto a flat surface. And then on these ones, you don't need to worry about only pressing the seam allowance. So pressing there, push it over, Press there, and then onto the other side. Press. Press. Okay, so that sleeve is now inserted and ready for the next step. But before we get onto that, I want to show you how to do the other type of sleeve, which is the view B sleeve. So we put view A on one side and we're going to have view B on the other side. So once again, I lay out the bodice right side up and I have the arm side here, and this is the side that I'm going to put the regular sleeve into. So I am doing the view B short sleeve. You can see it here. So again, I'm going to find the top notch and I'm going to align it with the shoulder seam. Now in this case, we still have those notches that were for the gathering, but we don't need to do any gathering. So now the distance between this notch and the top, the distance between this notch and the top, it's the same. So I just join them together. It's a nice wayfinder. Pin them here. Then I'm going to pin the end and the notches here. And then just add another couple of pins just to keep them together. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So bring the ends together. So this is the front side. So we just have a single notch on the front side, double notch on the back, single notches matching here. And again, just keep on matching. Okay, so if I lay this out, you can see that it is all pinned around from here to here. So now I'm simply going to sew and finish the seam allowance in exactly the same way as I did the other side. So by the power of movie magic, this sleeve is now inserted too. And in this case, we've done the traditional thing of pressing the seam allowance towards the sleeve. So at this point, it's ready to do the side seams. So to do that, we are effectively going to fold it in half, is what I call. So you take the shoulder seams and lift it up and lay it back down. So it looks like a t-shirt as you are wearing it. And now what you're going to do is you're going to pin the whole side seam. So it's the same on both sides, but it will look just a little bit different. So you open up the sleeve here, again, as if it was worn, and go to the underarm and match the seam at the underarm and keep the seam allowances pressed towards the sleeve, which is how we had you press them. And then I'm just going to pin at the end of the sleeve hem. And if you want, you can do another one in the middle. And then now you're just going to pin all the way down the side seam. So again, there are some notches that can help you get everything in place. I'm going to start at the bottom. You can match the waist notches together. And then just smooth it out, make sure the pieces are flat. And typically I just put a pin in every couple of inches. Okay, now we go up here. You can match the bust curve notch and match these sides. Okay, so that side is pinned. Then just do exactly the same with the other side. The only difference is that the sleeve is longer. But you will match up the ends and the underarm, pin all along there, and then pin all along there. And then I will meet you at the sewing machine. I have my side seam and I am going to sew down it in one go from one end to the other. Back stitching. When you get to the sleeve, you are going to lift up the presser foot and pivot round just a little bit so that you can continue down. And just keep on taking the pins out, basically. Make sure it's always flat. And there you go, that side seam is sewn. So I'm just going to do the same on the other side and then finish the seam allowances on both. Okay, so now the side seams are sewn all the way down, and actually if you wanted to, you could turn it right side out and try it on right now and see what you think. But we are now into the final stages of hemming the bottom, and then I'm going to show you how to finish the view A and the view B sleeve. So the first thing I would recommend to do is put it on now. So turn it right side out and try it on and see what you think about the length. If you want to cut it shorter, you certainly can. Now, we are assuming a 3/4 inch hem allowance like this, okay? So let's say you try it on and you pin it and you're like, I want it to be here. You want to cut it 3/4 of an inch down from where you want it on your body, okay? But I recommend trying it on now, seeing what length you like, and then marking it and then saying, okay, 3/4 of an inch down. But I'm going to assume this time that this was the exact right length for you. So we're going to get our iron, and you really want to do this one side at a time. So lay this out. So what we're going to do is turn over the hem to the wrong side by 3/4 of an inch. So I am going to just measure. Now, one of the fun things, if you use a stripe, is you can actually then use the stripe, assuming you cut it evenly, which we did, you can use the stripe as a guide. So that's 3/4 of an inch. So I am just going to follow along this stripe. And what I do is I just do it to about 1 inch from the end initially. And go along here, I'm going to do the same thing, just pressing it along this stripe. If you haven't cut it evenly, then you can't do this. Okay. And now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to remeasure it just to make sure it's right. Okay, so we're going to be going here. And you want to make sure you don't unpress the bottom as you're doing it. This is a slightly thicker knit, and so it's sort of pinging back a little bit, but that's okay. We just need the main crease in there. So I've done the front and the back, so it doesn't matter it's pinging back because it kind of goes back there. And now I'm going to do the side seams. So what I then do is I open it up. The side seams have been pressed towards the back already, and then just kind of join up the front and back pressing here. Okay, I'm going to go on the other side. Again, now let's make sure this is going the right way. So that needs to go towards the back. Press it up. A little bit of steam helps out. There we go. Okay, I set it flat again. And then I just double check. I'm like, okay, does it look all nice? Yes, it does. Another little press. Now, you have an option here. So you can pin this. We're going to be sewing from the right side. So if you're pinning, you want to pin on this side. Or this is a great opportunity to use Wonder Tape, dissolvable hemming tape. So I'm going to use it. So I'll show you how. So basically what I'm going to do is flip this out. The paper's on the top, sticky on the bottom. So I'm just going to stick it to my hem all along. Rip it. Now take the tape off. Sometimes, oh no, that did perfectly. And then literally, you just got to watch out, although I will say you can reposition it fairly easily. Just fold the hem over at the pressing point and seal it down. And then I actually like to quickly repress over it. That helps melt it. And so what's amazing about this now is this is temporarily fixed down. And when we are sewing from the right side, it's so much easier to have this in place because it can't wobble about. So I'm going to do it on the other side. You can theoretically just do small amounts of Wonder Tape, but I don't know. I just buy it in bulk, guys, and use it for a lot of things. It's very, very helpful also for inserting zips. So if you watch the sew along of the Elmley dress, I will show you how to use it for that. But anything where you need to temporarily stick something down, and it is more accurate than pins because it's pinning it down in a constant, like the whole way, as opposed to just in occasional places. And then I'm just going to add a little extra bit across here. Okay. Oh, hold on. See, I made a mistake here. The seam allowance, hold on, did I do it the right way? Let me just check. Oh no, it is correct. Okay, it's the upper seam allowance going in the wrong direction. So this is all meant to go in this direction. The reason you should pay attention to that is because if it goes in one direction at the bottom and one direction at the top, the seam allowance will be curling over. And when you wear the garment, it kind of gives it a bit of a bump. So these are the small things that you can pay attention to when you're sewing that will improve the quality of your garment. So again, this is going towards the back. Just going to add a little bit more tape in here. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to the sewing machine and we are going to be sewing this hem from the right side. Okay, so I'm going to put my hem right side up. Now, here's the tricky thing, especially when you're a beginner. You want to catch this edge consistently on the other side, but you can't see it. This is one of the reasons why folding it up very evenly is important, because if it goes in and out, you are going to miss bits. So I can actually feel the edge with my finger here, but because we turned it over 3/4, theoretically, if we just sew just under 3/4, so in this case, I'm going to go at 5/8, I'm going to line it up with 5/8, it should work totally fine. So I'm going to just do this now. Now it's a good idea to check. So I'm going to turn it over, and yes, that is catching the edge of my fabric. And just keep on doing it in sections. As you can see, one of the really nice things about using Wonder Tape is you also don't have to pull out any pins. And there you have your hem. So now you just need to press it. So the final stage of making your top, and you're almost finished, is hemming the sleeves. So they're different on the view A and view B sleeves. I'm going to start with the view A sleeve, the one with the gathering and the elastic. So the first thing we're going to do is actually very similar to the bottom hem, and we're going to turn it up by 3/4 of an inch, and we are going to press it. So same deal here. So I'm going to flip the whole thing over, and I just kind of do a guess. Okay, that's an inch, so that's a bit too big. 3/4 of an inch, there we go. Check that it's even on both sides. Then I'm going to press it. Now this time I am not going to use Wonder Tape. So, because we're going to be putting a channeling, we're making a channeling for elastic, and you don't want tape in there. So instead, I am going to pin this. Okay, so I'm going to pin it on the right-hand side, all around. Because it's a shorter distance, actually, the Wonder Tape makes less difference with sleeves. It's really with long hems where it's a bit of a game changer. Okay, just keeping that nicely in the same direction. Now, when we sew this, we are actually going to be making a channel for elastic to go inside it. So we want to leave a hole to put the elastic in. And my tip to you is to put double pins in the place that you're going to be putting the elastic as like a reminder to yourself not to sew that bit shut. Now, does it still happen sometimes? Yes, it does. You can always unpick it, but I've put double pins here. And just to note, like I've just put it to the side of the underarm seam. It doesn't actually matter exactly where it is, but it's a good idea to be around this area. So now I am going to sew this seam. So now I'm going to sew this hem. So even though we're sewing from the right side, I actually don't need to turn it right sides out because I can just do this. So I'm going to start at the double pin, go all the way around, end at the other double pins. And like before, we turned it over 3/4. So you need to sew just under 3/4 to catch it. Just keep on turning it. Oh, went over a pin there. Don't tell anyone. Okay. So just check that you caught the hem all the way around. Good. I left a hole. Now back to do the elastic. Okay, so this hem has been partially sewn, but with a hole. So now we're going to insert the elastic. So to decide the amount of elastic, you can either use the chart that's in the instructions, or you can do this neat trick, which is just tie it around your wrist. So you want it to not be tight, but be like close to your wrist. So do that and then add on another inch. There we go. So now you want to put your elastic either on a bodkin, which is like a pair of tweezers, and you tweeze the end and then move this ring down to secure it in place. Or you can do the same thing with a safety pin. Then you put it into the channel that you just made here and go all the way around. So at a certain point, you want to make sure that the other end of the elastic doesn't get pulled in. So you need to kind of keep hold of that as you were going around. So I'm just feeding the bodkin through until it comes out the other end. There we go. Occasionally, it'll fall off or things like that. You might have to do this more than once. You wouldn't be the first person in the world that has happened to. Okay, so it's come out the other end. Undo the bodkin. So I'm just gonna hold these two ends together for a second, and then I'm just gonna pull it through to sort of try and even it out a little bit. Okay, so I've got the two ends. The other thing you want to make sure is that it isn't twisted. Now I will say, this is more of an issue on wide elastic than it is in small elastic, but there we go. Okay, so now, look at that. See, I dropped them. I nearly lost them. No, there we go. So now I have the wrist is kind of cinched up because the elastic is smaller than the fabric. And I have the two ends sticking out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one on top of the other. So this is a bit different from normal sewing, right? We're always doing wrong sides together, right sides together. But we're just going to lay one on top of the other. And they're going to be overlapping each other by about an inch. And then I'm going to sew across the elastic, just back and forwards a few times there. Okay, so you put the elastic over itself, and then you have to carefully put it under the presser foot, lined up. It's a little bit tricky. And then you're probably gonna have to keep your hands on it as you sew. So I'm gonna try and show you what's happening here. And you wanna go backwards and forwards a few times. There we go. So now those two pieces of elastic are connected. You can trim the threads off, and you can also trim the excess elastic off either end. Okay, so now you literally just pull it and the elastic disappears inside. Now we have to close up this hole. So we're going to go back to the right side, and we are going to stretch the elastic until this hem is flat. So the easiest way to do it is on the machine. So I'm going to align this with the 5/8, backstitch. Now, again, I'm going to have the needle down, this helps. And then I'm going to pull the elastic until this is flat. Okay, so if I don't pull it, it looks like that. I'm going to pull it until it is flat. And then as you're sewing this, you want to try and keep the elastic in the channel. So you're not sewing on top of the elastic. We are just sewing this gap closed. And pulling again. And back stitching. And then I'm just going to trim the threads. Okay, so now you have your elasticated sleeve opening hem. So the final thing we're going to do is we're going to anchor the elastic down so that it doesn't keep on twisting around. So we're going to go to where the side seam is in the sleeve, and we're going to stitch in the ditch. So switch back to a straight stitch, and then basically we're going to stitch directly in this valley across the elastic. Just go forward, go back, that's it, done. So that secures the elastic and stops it constantly spinning around in that channel. So there you have it. And there is your finished View A sleeve. So you have the cute gathering at the top, slight fullness going down, and then your nice mini elasticated cuff. For the View B sleeve, you are just going to follow the exact same steps that you did for the hem of the t-shirt. So what you're going to do is fold it to the wrong side by 3/4 of an inch. Doesn't matter what the length is, we do the same hem. Press it and then sew it all the way around, which you've already done. Okay, and that's it. You have your Eustis top and you are well on your way to a wardrobe of t-shirts. So congratulations, you made your first t-shirt. I hope that it wasn't maybe as scary as it might have initially seemed. And now I want to share with you a few other ideas on where you can go from here. So first of all, there are things you can do to make yourself a whole wardrobe of t-shirts that actually look a little bit different. So the main thing you can do that's super easy is to change the length. So in the body, you can change the length to whatever you want. So whether you just want to adjust it a little bit because it's where it hits you better, but you can make it into a crop shirt really easily, just shorten it up. Or you can even make it into a dress. To make it into a dress, you simply lengthen it. And when you're doing the lengthening, the only thing I'd say is, just remember that if you simply lengthen, it will just go down like this. So it will be a very slim fitting column dress. If you want that, that's great. But if you want to have it a little bit more swoosh, you want to bring it out a little bit at the bottom so that it gives you a little bit more swoosh at the bottom. The other thing that I already mentioned is you can change the length of the sleeves really easily. So we've given you long sleeves on both View A and View B, but you can shorten those to whatever point you want. If you are doing the View A with the gathered top and the elasticated wrist, you can even make yourself puff sleeves very easily, which is very on trend right now, simply by cutting the pattern piece wherever you want it for a short sleeve. It will be fairly full at that point, and then just doing exactly the same technique, folding it over to make a little channel. And then what I would recommend in that case for the elastic is just wrap it around your arm and see, okay, this is the length that I want, and then use that. And then you can actually have a little puff sleeve, which is very on trend. So now you can make the Eustis. What else can you make? Well, the good news is you have now learned the basic knit sewing techniques for many, many patterns. If you head over to cashmerette.com, the patterns that I would recommend checking out that you can now make with the skills you have include the Turner dress, which is a really lovely, simple skater style dress that has a V-neck, which you can totally do now, and a full skirt. And it also has a lined bodice. So it's a slightly more advanced pattern than making the Eustis, but it's actually very straightforward. And that would be a great next step. You could make the Pembroke dress. The Pembroke dress is simply a t-shirt dress, and it has a really nice tie around the waist. You can do that now for sure. We also have the Dartmouth top, and that's a crossover top that's ruched on one side, and it's like a fixed top. So you don't wrap it, it just comes on you like this. And also the Saybrook tank. The Saybrook tank is basically a t-shirt that's sleeveless, and it has bands around the arm side as well as around the neckline. There are many others you can probably do, but those are the 4 that I would recommend checking out, and they're all on our website. Next, if you want to learn more about how to fit, I recommend checking out my first book, which is Ahead of the Curve. So in this book, I take you through as simply as possible how to improve the fit of your home sewn garments. But not only that, there are also another 5 patterns in here, and they are all beginner friendly. So actually, these are probably the simplest patterns we have, except for in Sewing the Curve. So it's great value as a result, because you get 5 patterns that are worth like $100. And we also have lots and lots of very, very simple instruction and before and after pictures to help you identify what your fit issues are and how you can solve them. So I recommend checking that out. You can get a signed copy at cashmerette.com/AOTC. The next great thing to consider is joining our club, the Cashmerette Club. So if you want to learn together with thousands of other people from all around the world, it is an amazing community-based membership. Every month you get a free PDF pattern and you get a masterclass from me. So if you like this sew along, there's lots more where that came from. And I take you through all kinds of things, from how to think about fit to how to do a full bust adjustment to how to do sleeves and things like that. We have live online events, there are discounts, there's a community forum. So if you are so excited about learning to sew and you're like, I want to talk to other people about it and I want to connect, I don't know anyone else who does this and I want new things, it is such a great opportunity. There are options to sign up monthly, there are options to sign up on a yearly basis, and it really is the most exciting place to be if you're really into sewing right now. So you can learn more about that at cashmerette.com/club. And then finally, but most importantly, I would encourage you to sign up for our beginner newsletter. And you can do that at cashmerette.com/learn to sew newsletter. When you sign up, you will get some exclusive goodies, as well as lots of tips and tricks for how to continue sewing amazing garments. So I hope you found this sew along helpful. I would love to see what you make. If you do make a Eustis top and take a lovely photo of it, you can share it with us on Instagram by using the hashtag EustisTop. Or you can share it in one of our Facebook community groups. Just go onto Facebook, type in Cashmerette, and you will see them come up. Or just send it to us directly. Email us at hello@cashmerette.com. I would love to see how you're doing, and I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have.